Ois hey. So the Rebbe is going to explain now. There is a third option, how to explain the amount of hishtachavoya that the shehiyah. One interpretation is that this is only shehiyah, that when you're bowing to the other direction, to the Mizrach, it's just about shehiyah, nothing to do with the hishtachavoah. The second interpretation, the second possibility, was that it becomes when you're bowing kidei shehiyah, if it lapses the time of shehiyah, then the hishtachavo becomes a hishtachavo, then it becomes a prostrating, which you're chayiv for delaying by prostrating. And as the Rebbe said before, it's only if you're prostrating, if you're just delaying that time and it's not just omad, maybe you wouldn't be chayiv. It's only because you're prostrating. But it comes out that the time limit that we're saying that it has to meet the time, which is called ishtachavoya, so that time is a shiur. It's a shiur of time in order to make up a hishtachavoya. So hishtachavoya that takes some time becomes a hishtachavoya. So there is a chatzi shir there that would still be osur, as the Rebbe explained. Now the Rebbe wants to say that when there is a time, it doesn't just mean it's a long hishtachavoha. That's why it qualifies as a hishtachavoha. But actually, if it's not the time, if it doesn't meet the time span, then it's not a hishtachavoha. The time is not the duration of the hishtachavoha, but the time makes up the hishtachavoha. And that's how the Rebbe is going to explain the three opinions. The Rebbe explains the opinion of the Babli, which says that you read the entire pasuk, and that first opinion, and the second opinion in the Babli that you do from Vayichru, and then the Yerushalmi, which says that you do from Vayichru and the end, and this will align with these three views. But let's look inside. Hey. We can, however, learn a third possibility, a third way, besides the two ways. As euch klapi chutz, that also when you're bowing towards the outside, is der chiyuv nit mishum shehiyah. The obligation is not because of delay, like the first opinion, nor mitzad der hishtachava, but it's because the bowing down. But yet there is a difference. Aber the shehiyah is nit nor ashir of der hishtachava klapi chutz. But the second way we're learning is that the shehiyah is the time that makes it hishtachava. But here we're saying it's not only a shear, an amount, a time lapse of the ishtachavo klapi chutz. So if it goes on for this period of time, the shehiyah, then it becomes a ishtachavo. Nor the shehiyah macht oif dem shem ishtachavo. That makes up ishtachavo. Without that, there is no ishtachavo. Mitzad atzmei, on its own, is klapi chutz nitot together from ishtachavo. There's no definition. It wouldn't even be a chatzi shir of ishtachavo, and there is no ishtachavo if it's not the full. If it's not the full shir, b'shas ober shokidei ishtachavo. When, however, he delays the time that it takes to bow, to prostrate, in that ishtachavo klapi chutz, when he is bowing towards the outside. That makes up, that defines it as prostrating, as ishtachavo. And that's why he's obligated for Ishtachavoy. So the second Oifa we learned before was, yes, it becomes Ishtachavoy. That's the shame, the Isur, the Chiyuv is Ishtachavoy, but it's accomplished when there is a duration of time. But here he says, without the duration of time, it's not Bechlal Ishtachavoy. Ishtachavoy only becomes when it goes through that duration. V'yeshloi marados is shitas harambam. You can say this is the view of the Rambam. As the Rebbe will explain, the reason why the Rambam says that posuk from Vayichru, he chooses the halacha is because according to the Rambam, this is the definition of Ishtachavo, that without the time span, it's not Bechlal Ishtachavo, and that will explain the various different difficulties in the Rambam, the wording in the Rambam. And therefore, is Aleph, we'll see the three special languages that the Rambam use. Is there medayik in der halacha? He is specifically saying in this halacha, Loi hichzir ponov elo hishtachave derech yitzeose klapi chutz. If he did not turn around his face towards the Beis Hamikdash, which there doesn't need a shear, but hishtachave in the direction that he's leaving towards the outside, Eine chayiv, he says, he's not chayiv, ele imkein shoho kishir. He needs to delay like the shear. Basically, the delay in the shear would make up hishtachavo. As we see. Number two, brengt shear shiyosik in the likrois vayichru apay marza ala rispa vayishtachu v'hoides lashem kitov kilelum chazdei. From vayichru to kilelum chazdei. So where does he bring down the law of shihiyah? In der halacha, this halacha over here, nit frier veneret wegen dem etzem isur shihiyah, not earlier when he's talking about the isur of shihiyah. He doesn't tell you over there this point that you have to, how long is shihiyah? He tells us only over here. The Rambam wants to teach us that when is it hishtachavoya in the case that when he's turning towards the Yitziose, Klapi Yitziose, when is it hishtachavoya? Is it when there is the Isur Shehiyah? Is it makes up hishtachavoya? And Firto is v'zeu shtira shir hishtachavoya. Then he concludes this is the shir hishtachavoya. So what is the explanation? Weil wenn der Rambam wohl gesagt, if the Rambam would have said, as the Rebbe asked in the beginning, that you're not going to be chayiv unless you're like the shir of the shtachavoya, the shihiyah, as the Rebbe said, on them oisfir, v'zeu shir hishtachavoya, without concluding, this is the shir of the shtachavoya. Volt men gelernt, so then one would learn, as klape chutz is do ageder fun hishtachavoya. Then you would say that there is something of bowing, even if it's at the outside. Like the second, we have the third way that I've learned, but then we go like the second way. But there has to be the combination of time together with that ishtachavoya, so you have an amount, a shiur, a value amount of chiyuv. If the Rambam would have said that it has to be the ishtachavoya. The Rebbe sagt the Rambam eine chayiv leim kesho keshir, that he's not chayiv unless he delayed the shir. Bekamo shir shehi yosei, how much is the time that he has to delay the likros chulu. V'zehu shir ishtachavoyu. And that shir makes up ishtachavoyu. The mitzvahs are madgish. With this, he emphasizes beidazachim. Both things. A mitzad atzmoi is nitok ken geder fun hishtachavo klape chutz. That on its own, if there's no shear, it's not just lacking a shear. There's no such a definition of bowing towards the outside. Shas ober shoho kishiur. When, however, he delayed the amount of time from Vayichru till the end of the pasuk, verder mitageder v'chiyuv mitzad ishtachavo. Now becomes ishtachavo. Was shear she yosei is when the shear of the delay is kidei likros vayichru apayim arza la ritzva vayishtachvu vaytis Hashem kitev kilelum chazdi kidlo kamon. As the Rebbe will explain why the Rambam Taka says this whole pasuk, why this pasuk represents this idea that it becomes a ishtachavo. Now, once you have the time lapse of the pasuk, that becomes the shiur of it, and now we have a definition of ishtachavoya. Und der Pfarrer sagt es der Rambam behemshach zu der halacha, and that's why the Rambam says it in the continuation to the halacha. Wo redt wegen dem shiur shehia ben ishtachva derech yitziose. In the halacha that he talks about the shiur of delay when he bows on the way, on his way out towards the wrong direction. Nit in the Friedrich Halacha, v'negeya dem etzem shir on a hashtachavo, not how long you have to delay. If without ishtachavo, it doesn't bring it down over there. But l'dasa Rambam is der geder shir ishtachavo, nit stam a geder v'chiv mitzat shihiyah, because according to the Rambam, the definition of the shir ishtachavo is not just a obligation defined as delay, because you delayed because it took you that time. No, does der shir gufa shafta geder from ishtachavo genau, but that time that makes up the ishtachavo. Ubemela eit der Rambam will gesagt dem shir in der friedike halacha of dem etzim isur shehiyah. Had the Rambam said this shir in the previous halacha on the idea of delaying, how much delay without ishtachavoya, both member pashtus gelernt, then you would learn simply as dos is nit shayich zum geder von shir ishtachavoya. You would say that this is not connected to defining the shir of ishtachavoya. That makes up ishtachavoya. We would say that just gives you the shiur, or the shiur is blois bichdei azol zayin ageder fun shehiyah. That in order for it to be defined also as shehiyah, that, and they would not know that makes it hishtachavoya, as the Rambam. So what is this? The Rebbe is going to explain now that all this is everything. The shiurim comes halacha Moshe Sinai. So what is the machlokes between the different possibilities over here? So that must be because the halacha Moshe Sinai says that the ishtachavo klape chutz needs to be kedei shehiyah. But exactly that was given to the interpretation of the Chacham. And therefore, each one interprets according to the way they define the Isur of what happens with the Shehiyah by the Ishtachavoyah. That nos verstehen bei Hagden Vov. We'll understand this by introducing the L'chayra Tzarich Lov. L'chayra, we need to understand. V'bal das alle shiurim zainen halacha l'Moshe Sinai, since all shiurim are passed down halacha from Moshe from Sinai, With the Rambam sagt, as the Rambam says, "Unin halacha l'meishu misena is nitoke machlokes." There's no disagreement about the halacha l'meishu misinai. Vi shayich hamachlokes in dem shiur shehiyah or drishtachava. How could there be a disagreement in the amount of shehiyah drishtachava, whatever the halacha l'meishu misinai said? So we have to therefore say, as those were the shiurim beniten the dan zayin and halacha l'meishu misinai. The fact that these measures, in our case, we say they are halacha l'meishu misinai, is the snor bechlal. It's in a general way. As the dar zayin shiyah kidei shiur ishtachavoya. We know halacha l'meishu misinai that the delay in order for klapi chutz to count as a shiur, as a shiyah, it has to be kidei shiur ishtachavoya. So if he bowed as it takes the time of ishtachavoya, then it is a isur. Aber was the shir ishtachavoya is lo nishparish, but it has not been articulated. We don't know. Halacha l'meishu did not say what is the ishtachavoya. And the far is in them shaykh haplukta. That's why there is possible that there should be disagreement, because that wasn't defined. It wasn't said what the shihiyah is. It just said that it has to be kedei shirish tachavoya. So now we have the difference of opinion. What is the shira tachavoya? So based on this, we can say as the pluktas ha'mayroim in shirish tachavoya, that the disagreement of the Ameroim, how long the Ishtachavoya, is totally in the Drei Yefanim, that hinges on the three Yefanim, Svoris Hanal. In them gather from Shoh Kishir Ishtachavoya, in the definition that he delayed Kishir Ishtachavoya, how much is the Shir Ishtachavoya? Halacha l'meishu misinai said that the Shir of Ishtachavoya klapi chutz is Kishir Ishtachavo. That delay, how long it has to be Kedei Ishtachavo. That's when Ishtachavo klapi chutz you'll be chayv. How much is that? We have the difference opinion. The Rebbe learns now that there are three opinions over here. We have the first opinion on the Gemara, what it says that it's the time that it takes to read the pasuk, and that would be the entire pasuk, as the Rebbe argued at the very beginning of the Sikha, that that's the pashtus of the meaning of the pasuk. And then we have the second opinion over there, which the Rambam quotes, which is from Vayichru. And then we have the other Yerushalmi that the Kesef Mishnah brought in, that there's an opinion that says you only read from Vayichru till Alaritzva Yishtachva, and you don't do Vayidus Hashem Kitoiv, the last part of the pasuk. These are the three opinions. These three opinions will hinge on the three definitions of the Amir in Ishtachavoya. In Ha'Yishtachavo, Bebeis HaMikdash and Faran, B'chlal D'rai Protim. Bowing, prostrating in the Beis HaMikdash, generally speaking, there are three details. Aleph, the Sibah was bring the Hishtachavo, the cause, the reason that brings the prostrating, which is the first part of the pasuk that talks over there, that the seeing the divine, similar that they saw over there. In that case, they saw the Eish, they saw the Kved Hashem. So that's a cause, base, and the second part is the second detail. Second prat is the etzem pu'ulas ha'ishtachava. That's the act of prostrating. And then Gimel, number 3, is the delay in prostrating, the thanking Hashem while you're prostrating. Gimel, the shehiyah, the delay as the time that you're mishtachava, that you're prostrated. Because Demel is man moidel Hashem, then you are thanking to Hashem and similar. Und das ist der Yesod HaPlukta in dem Shiur Ishtachavoye. This is the basis of the disagreement, how long you have to prostrate. What is the amount, the Shiur Ishtachavoye? Oib men lernt as the Shiur Ishtachavoye is a gather in Shihiyah, that the amount of Ishtachavoye is just because you're delaying. It's the delay, whatever the delay is. So it's not really to do with the Ishtachavoye. Ishtachavoye doesn't do anything. It's not. It's just a delay. If that is Jas, the Shir Ishtachavoye is a gather in Shihiyah. It's not Ishtachavoye. It's Shihiyah. B'shas asho kidei Ishtachavoye mechayim b'shum Shihiyah. So when he delays the time that it takes to prostrate, then the obligation becomes of Shihiyah, as quoted before. We hear from Rashi. So oich when the ishtachavo bepoil is klape chutz. So also when the bowing is outside, so you're not chayiv for bowing, but you're chayiv for shihiyah. So when you actually bowed in klape chutz, but you still delayed, so that is the time that you need to bow in order to be chayiv. Or also, so if that is the case, then it makes sense to say, as the shir hishtachavoya, that the amount, what is shir hishtachavoya, is with the shir from the ganzer say that hishtachavoya, that is the amount of the entirety, the entire order is the hishtachavoya mitchilosei v'hatzeifer, from the beginning to the end, mit alle drei protim genau, all three details. The pasuk starts off that they witnessed the fire coming down, and they prostrated, vayichru, and they thanked Hashem, because it's all about the shihiyah, the delay, and that's the delay, that's the entire thing. Oid melernt as der shirish tachavoya is nit ashir shihiyah, but if we learn that the shir of prostrating is not a shir to delay, not a gather from ishtachavo, but then it becomes prostrating. Damul is mistaber as the shir is viful as them the etzem pulas ishtachavo. Then it makes sense that the amount is what it takes the prostrating. So when the Aloch LaMoshe Sinai said shir ishtachavoya, when does it become ishtachavo? The time that it takes to be ishtachavo. That's the actual ishtachavo. That would be just like the middle part from Vayichru, like the other opinion in the Yerushalmi, that it's only the middle, but the actual part of the prostrating. However, the Rambam, who holds like the third idea, but according to the other third svara that the Rebbe brought down, adozainen beide inyonim, that the shehi, these are both of them. The shehiyah makes up. It's not a shir and shehiyah. It's not shehiyah, and it's not a shir that ishtachavo and that's b'shiyah, but that makes up ishtachavo. Adozainen beide inyon, the ishtachavo shavtzich. Mitzader shehiyah, that the hashtachavod that is created, that definition is because of the delay. Now it is the shehiyah. Damult is mistaber. Then it makes sense as is nit maspik the shir fun etzapulus hishtachavod, that it's not sufficient the amount of just the hishtachavod from vayichru till alaritzpa. Nor as darf sein kishir hashiyah shebe'es ishtachavo. It needs to be the line that it takes that lapses in the ishtachavo that you say v'hoides Hashem kitov, the other part. So the Rebbe explains that depending on how we learn the definition of that halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that the time is like the ishtachavo, depending on what the chiyuv is. If it's the chiyuv of shehiyah, you should read all three parts. That's the time that it takes all three parts. If the chiyuv is because it is ishtachavo, the shir ishtachavo, then you just do the ishtachavo itself. But if the shehiyah creates a new gather of ishtachavo, then you need to read the second two parts from Vayichru till the end. That's the shiur of the hefsek, the delay. Der mit Zayin, but when I verstehen, was the Ameroim anal, that's we'll understand why these Ameroim verbinden sehr plukta mit a chelik mesuyim for them posik davke, why they are tying their argument with a specific part of this posik. Das ist nicht nur als a simen study, it's not just a sign, oh, this is the delay, this is the amount. If them zman hashir, what is the shir? Not in them posik, but nirmas der teuchen aplukta, but rather in this posik, it's hinted the content of this argument. Viful is the shir ishtachavoya. How much is the shir ishtachavoya? Is depending on how much you're reading. Each Amoida says in this pasuk that it tells them how much is reading. How much of the part of this pasuk is the delay? How much of the delay? Does haste. Bald as halacha l'Moshe Sinai zogt. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai just tells us as the shir shehiyah is kidei ishtachavoya, that the shir of shehiyah is what it takes to bow without being clear. It has not been articulated. What is this shir of the prostrating? Is mistaber zu zogen, so therefore it's logical to say, as erges vu in Torah is da remes, it's takalach l'Moshe Sinai, but somewhere in the Torah there's a hint, there's a leaning on it. Wie is the shir ishtachavoya? How much is the shir ishtachavoya? Und der Riber is by allemen angenommen, and therefore everybody accepts it as the remes of the shir ishtachavoya. That where is the hint for the amount of how much ishtachavoya? Is it then posik in Torah and Divrayom in Beis, where this posik is Perik Zayin posik nimul v'as vert gezogt und metuyer. Over there, that pasuk discusses and it describes the ishtachavoya shebebeis hamikdash, the bowing down in the beis hamikdash, the whole prater for all the details. So that everybody agrees to. Nor zer plukte in welchem teil from pasuk is merum as der shir ishtachavoya. The disagreement is which part of the pasuk hints for the amount of the bowing down. Is totally in Teichen HaKosuv, that hinges on what the contents of the pasuk behesim to their plukta and alin svara as it fits to their argument in logic. So they have a logical explanation. What is this shehiyah? And based on that, they attach it to the amount to what part of the pasuk is the delay, and that will be the asmachta for the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which says that it's kidei ishtachavoya. Vabiru b'zeh. Explanation. In that pasuk, in this pasuk, there are three parts. Hascholas hakosu, the beginning of the pasuk, is v'chol b'nei Yisrael royim beredes ha'eish ukvoid Hashem alabayis. That the entire Jewish people, they saw after Shlomo built the Beis Hamikdash, as the fire descended, and the glory of Hashem came down on the Beis Hamikdash. But das is this sibbe was hat gebracht the ishtachavoya. That's the reason, the cause that brought the ishtachavoya. That's the first part. The emtzah cause, the middle part, they bowed, they kneeled on their face to the ground, onto the floor, and they prostrated. And then that part is the actual act of prostrating, the pulas hayishtachava. That's the act of ishtachava. And then the Seifa Pasuk is V'hoidus Hashem Kitev Kilom Chazdoi. To thank Hashem, who's good and forever is His kindness. The Teichen Matorah for the Ishtachava. That's the third part, third detail. The content, the purpose of the prostrating is to thank Hashem. So based on this, we can explain the difference of their opinions. As the Shir Ishtachavoya is ageder in Shehiyah, if we learn that the amount of the prostrating is defined because that is how long it's really Shehiyah, that's what it is. Und der Shir Ishtachavo is Shir a ganze Seder Ishtachavo l'chol protov, and the amount of the prostrating is the Shir of an entire order Ishtachavo, all the details. So we need all three details. Damot. So then, like to zogun, then it makes logically to say, as the Shir Ishtachavo is merumes in the kriya from the ganzen posik, that the amount of how much do you have to prostrate, it's hinted in the reading of the entire posuk. Vu es is metuar, the ganzer seder hishtachavo, in which the entire order of the prostrating has been described. B'shas means koilel oich haskolos hakosov, when you include also the beginning of the pasuk. The reason that brought that hishtachavoya is thus der teuchen inyan hashehiyah bebeis hamikdash. So that's the idea. So you can say, well, the delay. What is the delay in the beis hamikdash? For the entire three parts of seeing what happened and prostrating and thanking Hashem. Was his koldem ganzen seder. It includes the entire order. The siba, the cause, the riyas ha'om beredus ha'ishchulu. The people saw when the fire descended, the riyas ha'shchina. That was the cause. The ishtachavo, that was the act. Und the Eidova das gebracht, then that brought the thanksgiving. That's if we learn like the idea that it's all about shehiyah. The ishtachavo is like shehiyah. And what it takes, the delay, and delay should include everything. Oid meleren. On the other hand, as the shir ishtachavoyu is nita shir and shehiyah, that the amount for the prostrating is not a amount of delay, not a gather from ishtachavo, but rather it's defined as bowing. Damut is mistaber, then it's logical, as thus is the kriya for the Chelek HaKosuv Eshtei de Pulus Eshtachavo, that we're reading the part of the pasuk. That's the period that of the lapse of time is the part of the pasuk that talks about the act of Ishtachavo. That's just the middle part of the pasuk, which is the opinion in the Yerushalmi that we brought down. But according to that third svara that we said earlier, that what? That both together, Adozayin and Beidin Yonim, the Ishtachavo shaft sich mitzader shehiyah, that the prostrating comes because the delay makes it into a Ishtachavo, the Damut is mistaber, then it's fitting to say, it's logical, as it must be Kriyas Chelek HaKosuv. It's not sufficient just to read the part of the pasuk was read blois wegen der Peulos HaYishtachavo, that is just talking about the act prostrating the middle part of the pasuk. That is also reading the continuation, the conclusion of the pasuk was brengt darois dem teuchen, that expresses the contents kol hemshech HaYishtachavo, that is the continuation of the Ishtachavo. To thank Hashem, which is the purpose of the Ishtachavo. In them drikt sich ois, that expresses, is not just an act, that is a shiyadike, that it has a contents that you're bowing down for something, yet you are thanking Hashem. There is something more than just the act. So the Rebbe connects these parts of the pasuk uh, to the idea. If it is defined like according to the first idea, just in Shehiyah, what it takes, or that's you have to include everything. What it takes is what the cause, the act, and what follows up. If the hishtachavo is just hishtachavo, that it's bound, but it needs the shear, so it's mistaba. The shear is just hishtachavo. But if the hishtachavo is made up because of shehiyah, then you should have the contents also. So then it's the time from Vayichru till the end of the pasuk. Ches. Pizeh is moving oif der shinui v'chiluk for Babli Yerushalmi. Based on this, it's also understood the difference and the distinction, the difference of the Babli Yerushalmi. As in Bravli brings sich the Deya Kememra the High Psuka. The Rahi brings down in the Bavli the Pasuk, the entire Pasuk, for the ganzen Pasuk over here in the Bavli. Why? Because the Bavli goes like the view that it's the entire, it's the Shehiyah, that is the delay. Mashek in Yerushalmi, but in Yerushalmi, seinen alle Deyes, all opinions, nor b'shayches zum Sefer Dekra. Everybody says not the beginning, whether Vayichru Vayishtachavu or Vayichru to the end, Dekra, from Vayichru and Mahalam, from Vayichru not. In Babli is the Lashon, in the Babli, the language is V'kamo Shir Shihiyah. How much is the amount of delay? Was is Madgish, that emphasize as the Shir is an Inyan, was is verbunden, nit azoi mitten din Hishtachavoyah. It's not so connected that it's Hishtachavoyah. Nor she's a Geder for Shia. It's defined as Shia like the first way. In Yerushalmi Ober is the Loshen at Kam Ishtir Hishtachavoyah. How much is the Shiur of Hishtachavoyah? Not Shia. Das is a Geder for Hishtachavoyah. This is defined as prostrating. B'meile, werden dort gebracht nur die Ideen, so only the opinions was lernen up from the Chelek HaKosuf, only those opinions that learn from the parts of the Pasuk, welche reden wegen Pulas, der Pulas HaIshtachavo, only the Ishtachavo, oder euch Teuchno, also the contents genau. Aber nicht Hascholas HaKosuf, but not the beginning of the Pasuk, was is negay nor to them get of Shehir Canal. So in Yerushalmi, it's Hashtachavoah. So he doesn't bring the opinion of the whole pasuk because that's only if we say that it's Shehiyah, that the gather, what the Allah Sinai says, ki shir ishtachavoah, that's only Shehiyah. That becomes a gather of Shehiyah. So there's no point in bringing the whole pasuk because we don't do the whole pasuk. But within the ishtachavoah, it brings the Rambam the two opinion. B'meile werden dort gebracht nur die Deus es lernen auf der Chelek Pachos Akosum welche reden wegen der Peulas Haishtachabo. Aber euch Teuchno genau. Also the Teuchno, which means the Hoides Lashem, that's the second opinion, or the only Ishtachabo or the Teuchno. Aber nicht as Cholos Akosum. Was is negay nor zu negay of Shehir Canal. Not the beginning of the pasuk, which is only important to the definition of Shia. So it turns out, those was the Rambam pasuk, Ashir Shiyosik de Likres, Vayichru Apayim Arza Laritzva, Vayishtach Vayitz Kitev Kilo Chazdei, Vezeu Shir Ishtachavoya, which is the longer Shir. And that's the longer shear in Yerushalmi. So the Rebbe basically is saying that the Rambam is doing the longer shear of the Yerushalmi, like the second answer of the Kesef Mishnah. So the reason why the Rambam paskins is nit nor Violet Paskan Likula, it's not only because he's doing it Likula. As the Rebbe says, like the Kesef Mishnah says, because it's shorter, it's longer than just doing the middle part of the pasuk, and this you have from Vayicha to the end of the pasuk. Nor, as the Rebbe explained by the Dasa Rambam, is those their toichen vegeder from shir shiyah. From the Rambam, that's the definition and the idea of shir shiyah, v'shir ishtachavoye canal, that it brings, as I said before, that brings to the new definition to what is the what is ishtachavoye? That becomes the ishtachavoye. That's according to the Rambam. And that's why the Rambam paskins and the wording of the Rambam, everything fits in, like the opinion that you read from Vayichru till the end. And now the Rebbe is going to explain how all this is understood according to Chassidus. So the Rebbe explains now that Chassidus or Derech HaMusar, that the different levels of when we prostrate ourselves, whether it comes because we see a lukus, or we force ourselves to prostrate to Hashem, even if we don't have a an open understanding or a revelation or appreciation of that, and the difference between the time of Golus, the time of Beis Hamikdash, things were open, and now we have to struggle. But the Rebbe says it's also not, shouldn't remain just push yourself, but you should come to some sort of recognition of Hoidus Hashem Kitoiv, as the Rebbe will explain these three possibilities that we learned before. Tes, the Bir in the day is Al Derech HaMusar VaHaChasidus, explaining these opinions on the style of Musar and Chasidus. Hishtachavo is doch inyono, what is to prostrate? Betoichno, what is the context of, what does it mean to prostrate? Bittul Gamri, total subjugation. That a Jew subjugates himself to Hashem. In them, Zayin and Do B'chlolus D'ray Madregas. Generally speaking, there are three steps. Ayishtachavo b'shleimus, when they're prostrating, when it's in the highest full level. Mitzad them was by Eid is the hisbonenus b'moicher machshavto in gedulas Hashem. Is when the Yid reflects in his mind and his thought about the greatness of the Eibishter. Vertes by him bizen an oifem von re'iyah, then it comes to the Yid, it becomes, he sees it. When the Yid has a reflection, reflects, meditates, and he gets to see, inspired by godliness, that's seeing it, real. Royin beredes ha'eshu kved Hashem goyim, like the beginning of the pasuk, they saw as the fire descended and the glory of Hashem. Und das poilt of him ha'ishtachavo b'pishut yadayim v'raglayim, and that impacts him, that he prostrates, spreads out his hands and his feet, totally subjugated on the ground. Wird in ganzen Bottle zum Ebersten. He's totally subjugated in front of Hashem, to Hashem. Nit nor bichitzonius, it's not just externally with action. Does nor sein ganzer shir koime, his entire, when we say the person prostrates themselves, meaning the entire height of the person. To start, the highest level is the power of the light and his rotzen, his will, shaboy bereish, which is in the head, till the action. All of the person is prostrating, is bottled to the Eibishter. The idol chizdoa madreigem. But on the other hand, there is the other extreme, that he doesn't feel, he doesn't sense, there is no appreciation. He just subjugates himself to us, forces himself. His da madrege was by the Eden herzich nit on gilu von elikus. By the Yid, he doesn't sense any revelation of godliness. Nito der bnei Yisrael roim beredes ha'eshu k'vayt Hashem goymer. Doesn't exist the bnei Yisrael to see the fire, the glory of Hashem. Ba'afal pikein, yet he's a mishtarchaber, and yet he prostrates. It is oines es atzmoi umishtachave, he forces himself and he prostrates. It is sich machriach sich mevatl zum Obersten. A kolpon beweis, he forces himself and he subjugates it to Hashem. Minimally, what he does what Hashem wants him to do. His rotzin, his tainig, his seichel, his midos may not be inspired at all, but he does actually forces himself, the actual act of prostrating himself. B'chlolus Am Yisrael, when you talk about Jewish people as a whole, this is within individual. But when we talk about the Jewish people, there was a time in the Beis Hamikdash when we all saw Gilui Elokus. Is das al derech hachiluk that is similar to the difference Tzivishon Zman Habayis and Zman Hagolus, between the time of the Beis Hamikdash and the time of exile. Bisman Habayis is Elokus given Begili. During the time of the Beis Hamikdash, godliness was open. She's given Riyas Elokus. You can see godliness. Ukederech shebol liris, kederech shebol leirois, kach bol liris. The time of the Beis Hamikdash, just like Sholosh Pamim, Yeroah calls Zechurcha, you came to be seen. Hashem should see you. You came to see as well, because you had, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, a very clear vision of the presence of Hashem and the Shekhinah. So then, seeing it, that brought about the Ishtachavo b'Bchinas Pnimius, that the bow should be in an inner. At his bottle, legamri, that he's totally subjugated to not ungevor sein eigener Metzias, and he sort of lost his own entity. His man hagolus ober, but in the time of exile, oiseseinu loireinu. We don't see miracles. We don't see signs. We say in the davening, we can't go up and we don't see and to bow to you because we see. Since there is no seeing, we don't go up to the Beis Hamikdash. So then the prostrating, the bowing is not complete. She's not b'chitzonis, it's only externally. He has other wills, other thoughts. But it is machnia as haguf. He just subdues the body. Shelo yimroit shouldn't rebel. Aval ikirotz in the pnimis hanefesh. Einam muvutalos. That the main rotzen and the inner of his soul is not negated. He still has. So these are extremes. Either he sees godliness and is excited, and that brings about a level of total bittul through and through from Rotzen and Tainuk, or he's just subduing the action, what he's doing, and that's it. But he still has all kinds of other turmoil within him. But these two types of bittul, which is kol hapasuk, the entire pasuk from Kol Bnei Yisrael, Roi Disor, or the Nordi Maisa Ishtachavo, or just the act of the prostrating, Vayichru apayim arza ala ritzpa vayishtachavo, that they prostrated onto the ground and they kneeled and they prostrated to the ground. Seinen beide nit der seder harogel ba kol echad vechad mi Yisrael b'chol hazmanim. They're not the usual way. These extremes to either be fully inspired or to only subdue you, so that's not the. And that's why we have the Rambam Halacha, the middle way. Because the Erster Seder was is verbunden mit Shah, the first level, which is tied to the level of delaying, which means reflecting and contemplating, is a Madregen Eilis. That's a very high level. Nit allemol wird entlekt elokus. Not always godliness is revealed. Und nit jeder kann sich aufheben, and not everyone can raise themselves bis zu sein Kved Hashem, to the extent to see glory Hashem. Liidoch, but on the other hand, the zweiter Eufem von Hishtachavo levad, the second way of just prostrating is a nidrike madrega. That is a low level. And that's not an acceptable all the time. When I eat, darf sich ständig, mishtadel sein, a Jew should constantly, always try, put an effort to rise higher than this. As bei ihm soll die Stachavo sein, nicht bloß kriya ba'almo, that his prostrating should not just be just doing it, just kneeling. It is machnia saguf shlo yimre, which means you're just subduing your body, not to rebel. Nor oich kivam the liba. You should also have in your heart a hergish nafshi, a soul, a sense, a feeling of the sense. Das is the dritter oifem von hishtachavo. That's the third way of bowing down. To beginning his service is das beoifem vasoina says he forces himself. But from that gufa kommt zu a hemshech zu v'hoides Hashem kitoy beben. Then he comes to a continuation to thank Hashem because he's good. As er hot in them a herges hanefesh from Hido bitl Hashem, that he has a sense of his soul of thanking and subjugating to Hashem. It doesn't remain just forcing yourself, but you also get to have a feeling and a thankfulness to Hashem. Und der Eufnishtachavo, that way of prostrating, that is connected to every yid. Warum afal pi, although as nit yet that einer is yad sich loy v'ruach b'nosei maseges lohilin. Not everybody's intellect can reach his understanding, can grasp to create the Ave V'yira durch his bonus through reflection. As the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya Perik Tezayin, a bitl mitzat pnimi is nafshei, something to be subjugated from the inside. So that's too high, that's beredes, that's not everybody has the ability. Is aber voran bei jeden Iden a bitl zum Obersten mitzat nafshei. But every yid has subjugation to Hashem inherent in his soul. It's within the power of each and every one of the Yidden. Thus to arouse that, wake that up, and to reveal that. Was durch them gufa, through this alone. First he forces himself. The Yid forces himself. Machnia, the Rebbe says, and he subjugates himself to Hashem. Then at the end of the day, that reveals them the inner subjugation that is natural in his soul. The far paskan the Rambam. That's why the Rambam rules halacha. That's the halacha. Was a Torah l'reif tedaber. The Torah speaks of the majority to bring about that higher level. That you shouldn't just be forcing yourself, but you should also internalize, become inner. So that's why the Rambam says, "Kamo shir shihi yosi." What is the amount of the delay is to read kneeling on the ground, on the face on the ground, onto the floor, to prostrate and to thank Hashem for his kindness that is forever. That is the measure of Ishtachavoy. As the Ishtachavoy is mitagviser shehiyah. That prostrating has a certain amount of delay. It's not just the act. Not only does he have the point of prostrating action, but also the thanking to Hashem in his soul. But Rambam Lishitose, the Rambam goes according to his view that the Rambam expressed elsewhere in Hilchos Gerushin was Paskend, he rules as afila zaid was mendarfim koifezaim bebezdin shel akub. Even a Jew who needs to be forced in a bezdin of non-Jews to mekayim zayin tzivu ha-Torah, to fulfill the commands of the Torah, he says, "Is roitzahu lasis kol ha-mitzvahs." He also wants to do all the mitzvahs, uli yisrachik min ha-avedis, and to stay away from avedis. Und das is ritzoynei ha-amiti. That is real rotzen. That is true rotzen. Von jeden in every yid. Und der Far, and therefore the Rambam rules, as afilu vemen is im koife, even when you force him. Und begilu herzich on sein schreien, and openly you hear he screams. Roitzani, he says, "I want." That's what he's screaming, and that is nor mitzat kfir b'sheitim. It's only screaming so because he's being beaten with sticks. Sees kriya ba'alma. It's just only kneeling. It's not kavana there. B'chitzonis, this is external. Paskin, the Rambam rules as adrabah. The Rabbi says no. Ein ze onus mimenu. He is not forced from him. It's not us forcing him. He's not yitzrei musha tokfei. It's the Yetzer is the one that attacked him. Mikivon shahuka. And once he's beaten, achatoshash yitzrei, till his inclination has been weakened. And he says, "I want." So then the Gerushin is willingly. That's why it's a good divorce, even though it needs his consent. That's considered consent because he really wants to when he says Reitzani, even though you have to force him. And it's in a basis shel akul. That becomes a prostration that is also from his inner soul. That's really what's happening. B'meila, and therefore, since Yid has that automatically, inherently, so therefore it is demanded, expected by everyone, as in the Rishtachavoch, Itzoinis, was his not Maisa Bepoil, that in this prostrating the externality, which is just the action, so that by Zich Ma'oder Zayin or Megala Zayin, so he should awaken the Yid, and he should reveal Bizaz Yoimar, till he's going to say that bitl was his do behella mitzat pnimis nafshe, the subjugation which exists obscurely in the inner of his soul. He should start saying yoimar. As the V'hidus Lashem, durch der Peula was sich mishtadel zu poilen auf jeden Id bedarki noyam. And through this activity that we put an effort to impact every Jew in a darki noyam, in pleasant ways, ubedarki shalom, and in peaceful ways, as is zayin toshash yitzrei, that you should weaken the inclination, nor lekoife v'chulu, dar zayin a ganzer bezdin. If you want to force him, then you need the whole Bezdin. But here, we got to do B'dark Noam B'dark Shalom to weaken the Yetzer Hara. And it should be revealed his true and his inner will openly. Every Yid wants to do all the mitzvahs and to distance himself from Avedis. Is das noch mehr mahir or mezaris? It hastens and it speeds up the minyan Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, the building of the third Beis Hamikdash, and Ali Yidden, well, the regels, when all Yidden will go up for the holiday. As Vetzayin, the leaders will we'll see them, and then we'll prostrate from seeing at that level. B'shleimus Kedeboyi, in the proper, wholesome, complete way. In the house that you chose in the Beis Hamikdash, Mimheira b'yameinu mamish. This is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Haazinu Tovshin Memhei.